QU letter 1EF3 and H had just moved into an old house that her family had recently purchased. It was located deep in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by crumbling buildings, creaky wooden doors, and faded walls that no one seemed to care about. The first feeling she had when stepping into the house was one of eerie silence, but not the peaceful kind. It was the kind of silence that felt empty, as if it had been abandoned and left untouched for too long. Everything in the house was dusty, filled with old furniture, but there was one thing that unnerved her from the moment she saw it: the mirror in the bathroom. The mirror itself wasn't anything special at first glance. It was just an old rectangular mirror with a wooden frame that had dulled over time. However, when QU letter 1EF3 and H looked into it, she felt a chill run down her spine. It was as though this mirror had seen far too much, holding memories it couldn't forget. The glass was fogged with stains that, no matter how hard she cleaned, wouldn't come off. Every time QU letter 1EF3 and H stood in front of it, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her from within, even though she knew she was alone. She couldn't explain this strange sensation, but she tried to ignore it. She kept telling herself that the mirror was just an old item, and the odd feeling was just her imagination running wild. However, over the next few days, whenever she stepped into the bathroom, she found herself inexplicably drawn to the mirror. Despite her best efforts to dismiss the feeling, she couldn't help but glance at it. On rainy nights, QU letter 1EF3 and H couldn't sleep. The air inside the house felt dense, thick with an unsettling quiet. She often found herself drifting to the bathroom, where the dim light made everything seem even more eerie. Every time she noticed that her eyes would once again fall on the mirror as if it was calling her. Something about it made her feel as though she wasn't the only one in the room. She tried to shake off the feeling of dread that crept over her, but the more time she spent in the house, the more she felt that there was something wrong with it. The mirror in particular seemed to have a pull on her, a strange force she couldn't explain. One rainy night, unable to sleep, QU letter 1EF3 and H decided to take a bath. The clouds were heavy, blocking out any light from the moon, leaving the world outside a dark, indistinct blur. She opened the bathroom door and stepped inside, immediately feeling the cool, cold air rush towards her. The dim light of the room flickered slightly as she closed the door behind her, leaving her standing in the shadows. She stood in front of the mirror, seeing her reflection clearly, but as she looked into her own eyes, a strange sensation overcame her. Her reflection seemed different. There was something off about the way her eyes looked, sharper, colder, almost unrecognizable. She blinked in confusion, but when she looked back, her reflection remained the same. It was as if something was wrong, like the mirror was showing her a version of herself she didn't recognize. Startled, she took a step back, but when she glanced back at the mirror, she saw something even more unsettling. A shadowy figure began to emerge from the darkness behind her reflection. QU letter 1EF3 and H froze, her heart racing as the figure became clearer. A woman with long, dark hair that covered part of her face, her eyes wide and hollow, staring directly at her. QU letter 1EF3 and H quickly spun around, but there was no one behind her. She turned back to the mirror and the woman was gone. Her breath quickened as she tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, but the unease didn't leave her. Her mind raced as she wondered if she had seen something real or if the mirror was playing tricks on her. But when she looked at the mirror again, the woman's face appeared again, only this time she was much closer. Her eyes, empty and filled with sorrow, stared right into QU letter 1EF3 and H's soul. The woman wasn't just a reflection anymore. She felt like she was there, standing behind her, reaching out from the glass. QU letter 1EF3 and H stood there, frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The woman's reflection had vanished once more. But the unsettling feeling remained. She wanted to believe it was just her mind playing tricks on her, that the mirror was simply an old, imperfect object reflecting her thoughts. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She quickly left the bathroom, trying to push the incident out of her mind. However, over the following days, the sense of unease followed her, creeping into her thoughts at every quiet moment. At night, when the rain pattered against the windows, QU letter 1EF3 and H found herself unable to resist the pull of the bathroom. Each time, the mirror called to her, quietly, subtly, like a whisper in the dark. One evening, as the storm raged outside, QU letter 1EF3 and H couldn't sleep. The wind howled, shaking the windows, and the rain fell in torrents. Something about the night made the house feel even more empty and lifeless than usual. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she got out of bed and headed for the bathroom. When she stepped inside, the air was thick with humidity, the steam from the hot water swirling in the small space. As QU letter 1EF3 and H stood in front of the mirror, she felt the familiar unease creeping back. The reflection staring back at her seemed too still, too quiet. She could feel her pulse quicken as she raised her hand to touch the glass, but just as her fingers came close to the surface, she stopped. There in the reflection, she saw the figure again, the woman. But this time, the woman's face was no longer obscured. Her pale skin was drawn tight over her bones. Her eyes dark pools of emptiness. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. QU letter 1EF3 NHS breath caught in her throat, and she stepped back instinctively, her hand brushing the cool surface of the mirror. It was then that she realized there was something terribly wrong. The woman in the reflection wasn't mimicking her movements anymore. She was moving on her own. QU letter 1EF3 and H took a step forward, her heart racing as she stared at the reflection. The woman's mouth parted and her lips twisted into a faint smile, a smile that felt more like a grimace, filled with pain and something far darker. QU letter 1EF3 NH's hand trembled as she reached out again, only this time she saw it. The woman's hand in the mirror reached toward her, inching ever closer to the glass. It was as if the woman was trying to reach through the mirror itself, without thinking. QU letter 1EF3 NH pulled her hand back, stepping away from the mirror. The image of the woman grew more intense, as if the reflection was reaching out, trying to escape. Her fingers scraped against the glass, leaving marks that weren't there before. QU letter 1EF3 NH felt a chill run through her body as she realized the truth. The woman in the mirror was no longer just a reflection. She was trapped, trying to break free. Terror seized her chest as she spun around to leave the bathroom, but before she could turn the doorknob, the mirror's surface rippled like water. The reflection began to twist and distort, the edges of the glass warping as though the mirror itself was alive. "Help me," the whisper came again, this time loud enough for QU letter 1EF3 and H to hear it clearly. The voice was cold, hollow, like the wind itself had spoken. "Help me or you will be next." QU letter 1EF3 and H gasped and stumbled backward, slamming her back against the wall. The door creaked open and for a moment she considered running, but she couldn't. Her body froze as she watched the woman's reflection in the mirror shift violently, her form growing more monstrous. Her body stretched unnaturally, and her eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, locked onto QU letter 1EF3 and H, filled with unspoken rage and sorrow. The woman's face twisted in agony as if trying to speak, but QU letter 1EF3 and H couldn't hear the words. All she could hear was the sound of her own breath, ragged and shallow, filling the space around her. Then, as if something snapped in the air, the woman in the mirror opened her mouth wide, her lips stretching beyond what should have been possible, revealing a gaping void of darkness. QU letter 1EF3 and H felt a pull, an overwhelming force that drew her closer to the mirror. "No," QU letter 1EF3 and H whispered to herself, stepping back, her mind reeling in panic. "No, I can't." The woman in the mirror's form began to distort further, her arms stretching out like tendrils, reaching toward QU letter 1EF3 and H as if trying to drag her into the glass. Her reflection was no longer human, it was something far darker, something twisted and ancient. "Please help me," the voice grew louder, more insistent, filling QU letter 1EF3 and H's head with a maddening pressure. It wasn't just a voice anymore, it was a plea for salvation, a cry for release from an eternity of suffering. But QU letter 1EF3 and H couldn't bring herself to act. She felt paralyzed, trapped in the horrifying gaze of the woman. And then, with a sudden, deafening crack, the mirror shattered. QU letter 1EF3 and H screamed, her heart racing as shards of glass rained down around her. The room plunged into darkness. The last thing she saw before the light flickered out was the woman's reflection, standing, waiting, no longer trapped in the glass, but free. QU letter 1EF3 and H couldn't bring herself to look back. In the moment, the mirror shattered. She felt as though everything in the house had changed. Strange noises, distant sounds seemed to echo from every corner of the house. She could hear faint whispers filling the air, like cries of desperation and pain coming from somewhere deep within the darkness. The feeling of being watched, surrounded, was so intense that it paralyzed her, making it impossible to move. She quickly left the bathroom, wrapping a towel around herself, her hands trembling as she tried to regain her composure. But with every step she took through the house, the unsettling feeling followed her, creeping into her thoughts. The lights in the house seemed dimmer, the shadows deeper, and every room felt colder than it had before. The gusts of wind rattling the windows seemed to be the breath of something or someone trying to reach in. QU letter 1EF3NH stopped by the window in the living room and gazed outside. The rain was still pouring, streaking the glass, the sky dark and heavy with clouds. The world outside seemed to blend into the darkness, making the house feel even emptier. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong here, that something wasn't letting her leave. Suddenly, QU letter 1EF3NH heard footsteps, soft, almost imperceptible, but distinct. Someone was walking around in the house, yet when she turned to look, no one was there. Her heart raced and her body froze, but still she couldn't move. It felt like something was waiting for her, watching her from just behind. Without warning, the living room door creaked open. QU letter 1EF3NH froze, eyes darting back to the door as she saw a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the hallway. Her breath caught in her throat. There was a woman with long, dark hair, her face pale and hollow, her eyes empty, staring directly at QU letter 1EF3NH. This time, QU letter 1EF3NH wasn't seeing a mere reflection in the mirror. The woman was standing there as though she had been waiting for QU letter 1EF3NH. The woman didn't speak, but her eyes, filled with sorrow and some deep, unspoken agony, seemed to ask for something, pleading for help. QU letter 1EF3NH couldn't speak. She could only stand frozen, watching the figure. The figure stepped forward, her steps silent and deliberate. QU letter 1EF3NH felt a cold chill spread across the room, the air growing heavier as if time itself had slowed down. The woman's gaze never left QU letter 1EF3NH. It felt as if the room was shrinking, the distance between them closing with each passing moment. When the woman was only a few steps away, she stopped. QU letter 1EF3NH felt as though she had no control over her body, and her legs refused to move. There was a strange, almost magnetic pull toward the woman, as if some invisible force was drawing her in. Then the woman slowly turned her head toward the corner of the room, her eyes now fixated on the shadows in the farthest part of the living room. QU letter 1EF3NH felt a growing sense of dread. Something in the darkness, something unseen, was calling the woman. The figure didn't look back at her, but QU letter 1EF3NH couldn't shake the feeling that whatever the woman had been looking at was connected to the terror that had been building inside her. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed the window open and the living room door swung wide, causing QU letter 1EF3NH to stumble back. She turned, but when she looked back, the woman had vanished. The room was empty once again, the silence deep and thick. But QU letter 1EF3NH felt it, a cold presence lingering in the air. The door was wide open, yet the woman was nowhere to be found. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and for a long time, QU letter 1EF3NH just stood there in the emptiness of the room, unable to move. The weight of the silence was crushing. But she knew in the deepest part of her soul that she was no longer alone in the house. She wasn't just being haunted by memories or fears. The woman in the mirror was real, and she had come for her. As QU letter 1EF3NH turned to leave the room, she heard the whisper again, soft and cold, the voice that had haunted her dreams and filled the silence of the house. "Help me," the voice was faint, but it echoed, reverberating through the walls and into QU letter 1EF3NH's mind. "Help me, or you will be next." She whipped around, but the room was empty once again, as if nothing had happened. But the cold, the presence, the whispers, they stayed, they always stayed. The storm outside raged on, but within the walls of the house, QU letter 1EF3NH could feel an unnatural stillness creeping in. The whispers had stopped for now. But the air felt thick with something dark, suffocating. Each step she took through the house seemed to echo louder than the last, her heart pounding against her chest, her hands trembling. She couldn't shake the image of the woman, the pale, sorrowful figure with eyes that bore into her very soul. That image haunted her, even in the moments she tried to convince herself she was safe. She had no idea what the woman wanted from her, but deep down she could feel it, whatever it was. It was far from over. After the encounter in the living room, QU letter 1EF3NH had locked herself in her bedroom, but sleep was impossible. The silence in the room was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creaks of the house settling, or the sound of rain hitting the windows. Every shadow in her room felt like an extension of the darkness she had already encountered. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, she knew she had to face what was happening. She couldn't just keep hiding. QU letter 1EF3 and H decided to return to the bathroom. She had to confront the mirror, confront whatever had been lurking in it. She had to understand why she was being haunted by this ghostly woman. With each step she took toward the bathroom, her unease grew, but she couldn't turn back now. This wasn't just about her anymore. The woman. The spirits, whatever they were tied to this house, and somehow QU letter 1EF3 and H was caught in the web of their tragic story. She had to know more. When she entered the bathroom, the cold air hit her, and the dim light of the bathroom seemed even weaker than before. The reflection in the broken mirror was almost too much to bear, but it was there, waiting. The cracks in the glass only added to the sense of disarray, the fragments catching the faint light in odd ways. QU letter 1EF3 and H stared into it, her reflection blurry and distorted. For a moment, it felt like the room itself was shifting, the mirror warping before her eyes. And then there she was, the woman, standing behind QU letter 1EF3 and H, but in the mirror, not in the room. Her eyes met QU letter 1EF3 and HS, full of pain and something else, something darker. The woman's lips moved. But QU letter 1EF3 and H couldn't hear her. There was only silence, an oppressive silence. The woman's mouth twisted into a sad, anguished smile, but her eyes never left QU letter 1EF3 and HS. It was like she was begging for something. Unable to resist any longer, QU letter 1EF3 and H stepped closer to the mirror. The glass seemed to ripple, and a strange chill ran through her as she placed her hand against the cracked surface. She was drawn in inexplicably, as though the mirror was calling her, inviting her to cross over. QU letter 1EF3 and H had to know, she had to understand. Suddenly, the room around her grew darker. The faint light that had filled the bathroom flickered and then went out entirely, leaving QU letter 1EF3 and H in the dark. The only light now came from the reflection in the mirror, the woman's form glowing faintly, her face growing more defined. I can't leave," the woman whispered. Her voice was soft, almost as if it was coming from far away. It sent a shiver down QU letter 1EF3 NH's spine. "I was trapped here, and now you are too." QU letter 1EF3 NH stepped back, heart racing. The mirror seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the woman was reaching out to her, trying to draw her into the world of the dead. But QU letter 1EF3 NH couldn't move. Her legs were frozen, as if the ground beneath her had been chained to the very essence of the house. She tried to look away, but the pull of the mirror was too strong. The woman's image began to distort. The corners of her mouth curled into a malicious grin. She stepped forward, and QU letter 1EF3 NH felt as though something sharp had pierced the air. She gasped, as if something cold had brushed against her skin. But it wasn't the air, it was the woman's touch reaching through the mirror. Through time and through space. "No," QU letter 1EF3 NH whispered, her voice trembling. "Please stop." But the woman didn't stop. The reflection of her grew more intense, her figure becoming clearer and clearer, like an entity trying to break free from the glass. Her fingers pressed against the surface of the mirror, and QU letter 1EF3 NH could feel the cold seep into her own skin, as if the glass was no longer just a reflection, but a doorway to another world. "You can't escape," the woman's voice whispered again, but this time it was clearer, sharper. "None of us can." In that moment, QU letter 1EF3 NH realized the terrible truth. The woman was not just a reflection. She was a part of this house, a part of the curse that had been woven into its walls. And now, QU letter 1EF3 NH was tied to it as well. Suddenly, the woman in the mirror screeched, a deafening sound that rattled QU letter 1EF3 NH to her core. The glass cracked more, splintering down the middle, and as it did, QU letter 1EF3 NH felt a searing pain shoot through her chest. She cried out, but her voice was swallowed by the piercing noise. The mirror began to splinter apart, and the room started to shake violently as the pieces of the mirror fell to the floor. QU letter 1EF3 NH fell to her knees, clutching her chest. The last thing she saw before the room went dark was the woman's face, now grotesque and twisted, her eyes wide open, filled with malice. Everything went black. QU letter 1EF3 NH woke with a start, gasping for breath as though she had been underwater. Her body trembled, and she could feel the coldness of the floor beneath her, the hard tiles pressing against her skin. For a long moment, She didn't know where she was. The bathroom was dimly lit, the storm outside still raging, but something was different now. The oppressive atmosphere that had once filled the house felt heavier, more suffocating, like a weight pressing down on her chest. She sat up slowly, her head spinning. The shards of the broken mirror lay scattered around her, gleaming like jagged teeth. The reflection that had once haunted her, of the woman with the hollow eyes and twisted smile, was gone. But the feeling of her presence remained, lingering in the room like a bad dream. QU letter 1EF3NH pushed herself up, clutching her head as waves of dizziness rolled over her. She felt drained, as if the very energy had been sucked out of her. And yet, despite the broken mirror and the horrors she had just witnessed, there was one thing that gnawed at her deeper than any fear. She had heard the woman's voice clearer than ever before. "None of us can escape." The words echoed in her mind, repeating over and over. And in that moment, QU letter 1EF3NH realized the truth. She had become part of the house's curse. She wasn't just a victim of the supernatural forces that haunted this place. No, she had been drawn into something far older, far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Trembling, QU letter 1EF3NH stood up and turned to leave the bathroom, but as she reached for the door, it slammed shut on its own. The sound of it reverberated through the walls, and QU letter 1EF3NH froze. Her breath caught in her throat as the temperature in the room plummeted. She could feel the presence behind her, the weight of it, cold, ancient, watching her every move. Slowly she turned around, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Standing in the shattered mirror, QU letter 1EF3NH saw the woman's reflection again, but this time it was different. Her image was no longer distant or trapped in the glass. No, she was standing right there in the room with her, her cold gaze fixed on QU letter 1EF3NH. The woman's lips parted, and this time QU letter 1EF3NH could hear her clearly. "You think you can escape me, but you can't. You are tied to this place now, just like me, just like all of us." The woman's voice was no longer a whisper. It was louder, more insistent. The room seemed to close in on QU letter 1EF3NH, the walls pressing closer, suffocating her with the weight of the house's dark history. "You belong to this house, we all do, and you will never be free until you listen to my story." QU letter 1EF3NH stumbled back, her hands pressed against the wall as she tried to steady herself. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind racing for a way out, but she knew it was useless. The house had already claimed her, just as it had claimed the souls before her. The woman's reflection in the mirror began to shift, her face contorting in agony. "I was betrayed, left to die in this house. My soul was trapped here, and now I am bound to it for eternity. And you will help me break free." QU letter 1EF3NH shook her head, her chest tightening as she tried to fight back the terror clawing at her insides. "I don't understand. How can I help you? What do you want from me?" The woman's reflection grinned, a dark, twisted smile that sent a chill straight to QU letter 1EF3NH's bones. "You must listen to me. You must hear my story. Only then will the curse be lifted. And only then will you be able to leave this place." QU letter 1EF3NH's vision blurred, the room spinning as she tried to process the gravity of the situation. She wasn't just dealing with a vengeful spirit, she was dealing with the soul of someone who had been wronged, someone whose pain and suffering had bound her to this house. And now, QU letter 1EF3NH was part of that cycle, trapped in the very same torment. Suddenly, a deep, guttural laugh echoed through the room, the sound vibrating through the walls. QU letter 1EF3NH turned to find the source, but there was no one there, only the woman in the mirror. But her face, it had changed. Her features were more contorted now, twisted by anger and hatred. "You don't understand, do you?" the woman hissed. "This house is my prison, and now it's yours too. We are bound by the same chains, cursed by the same fate. You cannot escape until my story is told." QU letter 1EF3NH took a step back, her mind racing as the woman's words echoed in her ears. The curse of the house, the spirits, the mirror, everything was interconnected. And now, QU letter 1EF3NH was a part of it, whether she liked it or not. Terror gripped her heart as the woman in the mirror slowly reached out her hand toward QU letter 1EF3NH. "Listen to me." The woman whispered, her voice low and urgent, "and you will set us both free." For a moment, QU letter 1EF3NH hesitated. She knew that helping the woman might be the only way to break the curse that had been placed upon her. But at the same time, a part of her feared what would happen if she gave in. Would the woman's story be too much for her to bear? Would the dark secrets of the house be revealed, secrets that could shatter everything she thought she knew? But before she could make her decision, the mirror began to crack, a sharp sound filling the room. The reflection of the woman twisted and broke apart, the glass splintering into jagged shards. And then in the darkness, QU1EF3NH heard it, a faint, mournful cry, followed by the unmistakable sound of something moving in the shadows. It was the beginning of something far worse than she had imagined. QU1EF3NH's breath came in shallow gasps as the room around her began to close in. The cracked mirror was still reflecting the twisted image of the woman, though now it seemed as if the woman's face was no longer trapped within the glass. The reflection flickered, almost as if it were alive, pulsating with an energy of its own. Every corner of the room felt suffocating, the walls pressing inward, forcing her to stay in that haunted space. She knew the woman in the mirror, this spirit, was desperate, seeking to be freed from her torment. But the thought of hearing her story, of delving deeper into the pain that had bound the woman to this house, filled QU1EF3NH with an unbearable sense of dread. Could she bear it? Could she face whatever darkness the woman was hiding? "You cannot leave until you listen," the woman's voice echoed softly. As if coming from within QU1EF3NH's own mind, "You are already a part of this story now." QU1EF3NH staggered back, her mind racing. The house was no longer just an empty building. It was alive with the energy of the spirits trapped inside. The woman, whose name QU1EF3NH still didn't know, wasn't just a victim of fate. She was an integral part of the house itself. And QU1EF3NH was bound to it now, too. Her eyes flicked to the broken mirror, her hand reaching for the remnants of it, as if trying to hold onto something, anything that could help her make sense of what was happening. But when her fingers brushed the shards of glass, she felt an electric shock surge through her body. It was like the house itself had come alive, reacting to her touch. The temperature in the room plummeted, and a freezing cold wind seemed to blow through the walls, despite the closed windows. In the depths of the chilling silence, she heard a sound, soft at first. A voice coming from the darkness that seemed to stretch out from the corner of the room. It was the woman's voice again. "Do you hear it?" The whisper was barely audible, but it rang in QU1EF3NH's ears. "Do you hear the story of my death?" A chill ran down QU1EF3NH's spine. Her legs shook as she tried to steady herself. But the force of the presence in the room held her in place. It wasn't just the ghost of the woman, it was something deeper, something darker, the very essence of the house that had been corrupted over the years. "Please," QU1EF3NH whispered, tell me what happened to you." For a moment there was silence, then slowly the woman's reflection began to shift again. Her features softened as though she were preparing to speak. The reflection in the mirror grew clearer. And QU1EF3NH saw her face, pale and hollow, yet full of sorrow and anguish. It was no longer just a reflection, it was a doorway. The woman's lips parted and her voice filled the room, her words full of grief. "My name was Lin," she began, her voice trembling with pain. "I was once like you, full of life, full of dreams, but I made a mistake that cost me everything. I trusted the wrong people, loved the wrong man. And when it was too late, I realized what had happened." Lin's face twisted, and a look of torment clouded her features as she continued. "He was supposed to be my salvation, my refuge, but he was the one who betrayed me. And when I needed him the most, when I begged for his help, he turned his back on me. I died in this very house, alone and unloved, my screams unanswered, my body left to rot." QU1EF3NH felt a deep sorrow stir within her chest, as if Lin's pain was now her own. She didn't know how or why, but the connection between them felt undeniable, like two souls bound by fate. "I was trapped in this house," Lin's voice whispered, "not just by death, but by the things I had left unsaid, the wounds I had never healed. I could not leave, and neither could the others. We are all prisoners of our own regrets." QU1EF3NH's mind reeled. The house, the spirits, it was all connected. Each soul, each tragedy had been sealed within these walls by their own unfinished business, their own inability to forgive. And Lin was the key. She had been the first to die, the first to be bound here, and her sorrow had kept the curse alive. Lin's eyes bore into QU1EF3NH's, her expression plating. "You must understand," she whispered. I need you to hear the rest of my story. Only then can I finally be free. QU letter 1EF3NHS voice caught in her throat. She felt the weight of Lin's words pressing down on her. But the thought of hearing more was almost unbearable. She had already glimpsed the darkness that had consumed Lin's soul, the betrayal, the pain. She couldn't imagine what else the woman had endured, what other horrors lay buried in the past. But before she could respond, the room around her seemed to shift. The temperature dropped even further, and a heavy fog began to fill the bathroom, swirling in thick tendrils, as though the house itself was exhaling its trapped spirits. The woman's voice grew louder, more insistent. "The curse will never end," Lin's voice cried. "Unless you listen to everything, you have to hear it all." QU letter 1EF3NHS breath came in ragged gasps as she realized that she had no choice. The house was closing in on her. The mirror was no longer just a reflection. It was a portal to the past, to the tragic deaths that had occurred in this very room. With a trembling hand, QU letter 1EF3NH stepped closer to the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. She was afraid, but she couldn't turn away. Lin's story was now her story too, and so she listened. The room was thick with the weight of QU letter 1EF3NHS realization. She had heard Lin's story, painful, tragic, filled with betrayal, death, and regret. The echoes of the woman's suffering reverberated in QU letter 1EF3NHS mind, filling the space around her like an oppressive fog. She felt the air growing heavier with each word Lin had spoken, the darkness of the house closing in on her, as if it too were waiting for something to happen. But QU letter 1EF3NH understood now. She understood that the only way to break the curse, to free herself and the souls trapped in this house, was to confront the past. To face the darkness head-on, she had to forgive, she had to release the pain. Lin's face in the mirror had softened, no longer twisted with sorrow or rage. The woman looked almost at peace, but her eyes still held the same pleading expression. "You must let go of your own regrets," Lin whispered softly, as though speaking directly to QU letter 1EF3NHS soul. "You cannot carry them forever. It is time to free us all." QU letter 1EF3NHS body trembled as she stepped closer to the mirror. The reflection was no longer just a reflection. It was a window to the souls, a gateway through which their stories had been told, their anguish released. The house had been their prison, but it was also their salvation. Through forgiveness, they could be freed and the curse could be broken. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling as it reached out towards the glass. The moment her fingers touched the cool surface, the mirror began to pulse, the glass vibrating under her touch. The dark mist that had enveloped the room seemed to dissipate, the oppressive weight of the house lightening just slightly. "Lin," QU letter 1EF3NH whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry for what happened to you. You didn't deserve it. You didn't deserve to be forgotten." The air shifted. It was subtle, but QU letter 1EF3NH felt the change. The suffocating darkness was beginning to lift, the oppressive atmosphere beginning to break. For the first time since she had arrived in this house, QU letter 1EF3NH felt a sense of relief, of release, as though the weight of 1,000 years of suffering was being lifted from her shoulders. Lin's reflection smiled softly, her eyes glowing with a gentle light. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but it echoed in QU letter 1EF3NH's heart. "You have freed me, and now you will be free too." In that moment the mirror cracked once more, but this time it wasn't the sound of despair, it was the sound of liberation. The shards of glass broke apart, scattering across the floor in a shower of light. The room was bathed in a soft, warm glow, as though the house itself had been reborn. The coldness lifted, the storm outside stopped, and the air in the room felt alive with energy, like a breath of fresh air after a long, suffocating storm. The oppressive darkness had finally been broken. The spirits, once trapped in this house by their own regrets, were no longer bound to its walls. QU letter 1EF3NH closed her eyes, letting the peace wash over her. She no longer felt the weight of the curse, no longer felt the eyes of the spirits watching her. She had done it. She had helped them all, helped them forgive, helped them find peace. When she opened her eyes, the house was different. It felt light, airy, as if the very air had changed. The mirror, now shattered on the floor, was no longer a source of fear. It was simply a broken object, a relic of the past. The house, once so full of torment and sorrow, had been freed. QU letter 1EF3NH stepped away from the broken mirror, her heart light for the first time in weeks. She walked out of the bathroom toward the door. As she stepped outside, the storm had cleared. The night sky was calm, the stars shining brightly above her. The air was crisp, the world around her peaceful, as if nothing had ever happened. But QU letter 1EF3 and H knew better. She had faced the darkness. Listened to the painful stories of the souls trapped in this house and helped them find peace. And in doing so, she had freed herself as well. The curse had been broken not by force but by the power of forgiveness, the only thing that could truly set them all free. And as QU letter 1EF3 and H walked away from the house, she knew that she had been part of something far greater than herself. She had helped heal the past, and in the process she had healed herself. The house, once cursed, now stood empty. The souls were gone and the darkness was lifted. It was no longer a prison but a place of peace. And as the moonlight bathed the house in a gentle glow, QU letter 1EF3 and H knew that no matter where she went from here, she would always carry the lesson she had learned. Sometimes the greatest power we have is to forgive.